Great, thank you very much, Modoni. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let's apologize for the technical hitches. All the preparation in the world doesn't prepare you for the actual moment when technology decides that it's not going to work, even though it worked perfectly when you were rehearsing. So please accept our apologies for that. So look, I'll welcome you to this town hall conversation. It's on grant making in an election year in Kenya. You've been told that my name is Udwaka Mimo. I'm your moderator. It's a pleasure to be with you. It's always a pleasure to be with the Sego Family Foundation and its friends and partners and family. Now, as you can see from all the technical difficulties we're having, this conversation is taking place virtually. I believe we're live streaming, or attempting to, on Facebook and YouTube, which we're all familiar with, but I will go through some housekeeping. First, as you've been saying, please introduce yourself in the chat box by telling us your name, your organizational or professional affiliation, and your role. We'd also like you to use the chat box to comment and ask questions during the session, and I'll weave them into the conversation as we go along. The town hall will be recorded. The recording is in progress, as you can see. The other thing we would love for you to do is to share your thoughts about this conversation on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Tagging the Sego Foundation. Their handle is @Sego Foundation, and the hashtag for this conversation is grantmaking during elections. Now, before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to take your pulse. And I'd like to do that with a few questions, starting with this. Virgile, I believe you're the one running the poll, and so please put the question up. And the first question, as you can see, is in Kenya's 27 elections, which electoral seat was the most expensive for candidates to campaign for? And you see your choices there: member of parliament, member of county assembly, women representative, or I believe we should have Senate there, because we've got 2 county assembly in the poll. We should have Senate. So what we'll do is we will make the first one, where you see member of county assembly, the first one, we will treat that as the Senate. And the second question is for grantee organizations: to what extent was your income from grant funding affected by the 2017 elections in Kenya? And you have 3 options. Did your funding increase? Did it stay the same, or was it reduced? The third question, we don't see all the options. We see just the one, but this is for donor organizations. To what extent were your levels of grant funding to Kenya influenced by the country's 2017 elections? And I think if we scroll up, Virgile, we should see increased grant funding to Kenya because of the election, reduced funding to Kenya because of the election, funding levels remaining the same, or funding being withheld because of the elections. So we'll just give you some time to respond to these questions. But Mudhoni, Virgile, the third question isn't showing properly. So I'd be grateful if you could scroll that through. And technology has smiled on us. Our videos are working. Okay. Virgile, Mudhoni, question number 3. We're not seeing the options for the donor organizations. Can you blow it up or do something so that the funding organizations can respond to that question? And it seems we are told by Jacqueline that the submit button doesn't seem to be working. Okay, Jacqueline and everybody else, please bear with us. Technology is slowly smiling upon us. Okay, and when those results are ready, if you could screen them for us, please. Oh, okay. Right. So the majority of you think that the member of parliament seat was the most expensive for candidates to campaign for. The correct answer is actually the Senate. It costs upwards of $350,000 to contest for the Senate seat. And part of the reason for that is the Senate seems to attract a more mature political profile. Now, the same is supposed to be true for the women's representative, but the women's representative seat suffers from the stigma of being seen as affirmative action. And so the people who typically contest the Senate are more mature, more established, and more, for lack of a better term, more sophisticated people, and that tends to affect the way that election is run. And so the next two answers, we're seeing that grant organizations funding stayed the same. That's not a bad thing. 50% of you is saying that. Some of you experienced decreased funding in 2017. And for just a very few of you, 13% grant funding increased. And for donor organizations, 25% of you say that you increased grant funding because of the election. 19% of you say you decreased funding to Kenya because of the election. 44% of you say that nothing changed, the funding remained the same. And 13% of you say that you withheld funding in 2017 because of the elections. Okay. I'd like to share some context to those questions with our friends here who might not follow elections in Kenya and current affairs in Kenya too closely. May I have the next slide, please? The next slide with the data. So while that comes up, what you need to know, and the context to some of those questions we asked you, is that by regional standards, not this slide, the one with the data about the elections, this one. And so what you're seeing here is that by regional standards, Kenya has a fairly robust economy. And what you're seeing on your screens is what happens to the Kenyan economy during election years. It slumps. So the dips you see with the blue dots on the grids are election years, 1992, 1997, 2002, 2007, 2013. And that's extracted and demonstrated on the next graph. So the Kenyan economy slumps during election years. And this is true going back to 1992, as we can see, right up to and until the last general election in 2017. We have no reason to believe that this election cycle will be any different. So why does this matter? Why should we care? Well, the dips in election years that we've just seen mean that more people fall into poverty. More people are unable to access the basic rights of food, water, shelter, healthcare. They're unable to access justice and social protections. More children are unable to access education. More women and girls are subjected to gender-based violence. The fallout in Kenya during elections affects our neighborhood too. Basically, when Kenya sneezes, our neighbors catch a cold. I'll turn to our panelists now, and over the course of the next couple of minutes, we'll explore their lived experience of elections, how they've responded to those challenges, and some ideas for grant-making organizations on how best to respond to the needs of their grantees and the communities they support that this election cycle will throw up. What our speakers have in common is a fearless commitment to social change. They are all incredible leaders within the civic space. And the first person I'll introduce is Khadija Omar Rama. Khadija is the founder of Pepo La Tumaini Jangwani, which is based in Isiolo in the northeast of Kenya. She's been recognized locally and internationally for her efforts to fight the stigma surrounding HIV and AIDS. Next to her on the slide, you see Alfred Siegel, who's the founder of the Pwani Youth Network, which is based in Mombasa along Kenya's coastline. And what they do is work to promote peace and address issues affecting youth, women, and children. Next up, we have Boniface Mwangi. He's an award-winning photojournalist, activist, author. He's also the founder of the Ukweli political party. And last but not least, we have Nerima Wako Ojiwa. She is the executive director of Siasa Place, a youth-focused and youth-serving organization that helps young people in Kenya engage meaningfully with public affairs. Nerima, Boniface, Khadija, Alfred, welcome. The first question I'd like you to respond to is, how have the communities you belong to, the communities you serve, been affected by elections in the past? And I'll start with you, Alfred.
Thank you so much, for this interesting opportunity to share my experience. So I was born and brought up in one of the largest slums in Mombasa called Bangladesh. And today I'm here to share personal experience while growing up in that community. So I've seen the post-election of 2017, the post-election of 2013, and to make it worse, Bangladesh has been one of the areas that was vastly affected during all this post-election violence. The area is a home. The area is a home to more than 50,000 people, and in each and every elections, we've seen young people getting involved in violence, houses and small shops breaking down, schools closing down, and also, to some extent, small businesses of young women getting affected. We've also seen an interesting conversation whereby in the last election, one of the areas that did not vote completely was Bangladesh. During that D-Day to the elections, some people, actually community members, showed up because they were allied to a specific political party and smeared feces on the desk and also on the floors of the specific polling station in that community. While all this is happening, remember all the social amenities have been affected. And just like in Kisumu, whereby a young Pendo was killed, in Bangladesh also we've seen young people getting shot. And in the 2013 elections, whereby it was even worse, and we had a couple of people within that community who were killed. And to make it worse, they were specifically young people. All this matter is that politicians and some of these aspirants have, in one way or the other, fueled this thing and made sure that young people played a role. But it is so important that we need to stand up, we need to do something to ensure that we don't go back to what we've been seeing for the last couple of years. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alfred. Khadija, I'll ask you the same question. How have the people you serve, people affected by HIV and AIDS, how have they been affected by elections in the past?
Well, in my region, elections are really affected by, especially during this time of election is where we have rampant rustling. And this one causes a lot of business. And so people are not able to vote because they are displaced. And it is something which actually is designed so that if the majority of people are voting for a particular person, and because of tribal superiority, then that person will kind of design a kind of rustling that will push the communities away from that area. So at the time of election, people don't actually vote because they are moving around. We also realize a lot of displacement due to the clashes, and also because of tribal superiority. There is a lot of conspiracies that actually are done by the persons who are being elected. If you're not coming from a political right tribe, then actually you are the enemy during this time. And in this way, livelihood is disrupted, and also there is a lot of anxiety in the communities.
Thank you for that context, Khadija. And that context has to do with the fact that you come from the pastoralist communities, hence the cattle rustling. But the organization you found caters specifically to people living with HIV and AIDS.
Yes.
In addition to everything that happens around cattle rustling, displacement, ethnic clashes, communal clashes, what's happening to the people that you are trying to protect from stigma, who've been ostracized because of their HIV status? What happens to them during election years?
Actually, it is a time whereby, it is only organization which is actually humanitarian in this region. So it is this place that everybody runs to. They don't run to the Catholic Mission for Peace and the Salama, they run to Popola Tumaini. So at this time, we also now drum up the campaigns against stigma and discrimination. We say, okay, you run away from HIV and AIDS, and here you come, this is where you get peace. So at the end of the day, this is where now we put our efforts together and we commit on trying to kill discrimination and stigma. And in some ways, we have been able to do that because at least this is a sanctuary of peace.
Thank you, Khadija. I'll turn to you, Nerima, because you work with young people. We've just heard about young people being used to foment violence, but also being targeted, people being unable to vote, whether it's in Isiolo or whether at the coast. Given that your organization serves and focuses on the youth, what sort of experiences do you hear from the people you serve when it comes to elections?
Well, unfortunately, what Alfred describes is something that happens similarly, but different counties experience different things and communities. So I can even give classic examples of the marginalization of young people who are based in counties or communities that even right now, if we talk about voter registration, there wasn't any, and I'm talking about Lamu. Because of insecurity or even access. So there are people who literally, young people who are not reached. And even if they are, it's at a minimal rate. So when we talk about the violence as well, we have the young men who are instigated and participate. We have the young women who now receive the violence. And even when we talk about rape, there are not a lot of cases that are reported during this period. So even as of now, we're not quite sure how many women went through violence during that time. And that's a figure that we will never know because that's something that occurs every election cycle. But because it's not reported, we don't know the numbers and we don't understand the figures or how drastic it is. But something that I am seeing is the apathy that is definitely growing because 2017, the economy, just before the handshake, it was terrible. And majority
and the handshake, you mean for people who are joining us, these formerly opposed political, camps coming together, through the colloquial handshake and pledging to work together.
Exactly, because I can even remember the day that it happened in March. I was in Busia County and we were having a forum, and the forum had to stand still because everyone had to see the news and everyone was on their phones. So you can see how it impacted young people. And now we are living through a time where we've just gone through COVID and the country is just finally starting to sort of kick back up. And we're seeing the high cost of living now affecting everybody and the prices of fuel, and which is now related to everything else. So there's a sense of hopelessness, tiredness, apathy that a lot of young people are feeling. Does it really matter who I vote for? And that's the same across the board, where youth just are losing trust within the systems, losing trust in IEBC, and not understanding why the need for their participation, because the people involved are the same. So a lot of them are taking advantage of the politicians who are coming to the ground and demanding bribes, because that's also the only time that they're going to interact with them, and they're capitalizing on it. And those are the shifts that I'm seeing among young people within the country.
Thank you, Nerima. Boniface, I'll turn to you on the same question, but I'll modify it slightly to ask, we hear all these things happening in the way that elections affect different people, different demographics, different communities. And there's a question about, does my vote count? Does it matter? So the question is double-pronged. One, from your experience as an activist, an artivist, given your experience of Power 254, but also your experience of founding a political party and contesting the election. What are you seeing? Does it matter? What are you feeling at the moment? And what are people saying to you about how this kind of election cycle is affecting them?
Thank you. So your vote matters. Doesn't matter if you're going to vote for someone and they only vote in the room. It matters a lot. So elections are not about actually winning. It's about resistance. So for example, if there's a clean candidate vying on a particular seat, if there's an MC or a member of parliament and get 1,000 votes or 2,000 votes, that means that in that community, there are 2,000 people believe in change. So even if they don't win, this actually gives people hope that things can change. So that's number one. So doesn't matter the person that you support is not very popular and doesn't seem they're going to win. Please do vote, because when you don't vote, that means you're voting for the person who actually wins. So when your vote is absent or you abstain yourself from voting, you're actually saying something that lack of that vote. And it's very important that when our kids are old enough and they ask us, who did you vote for in this election? You have something to tell them, because abstaining is not a vote, and abstaining actually is supporting the people that you don't even like. I'll give an example. The reason why Hillary lost is because people assumed Trump was never going to win. So the people who abstained from voting ended up voting for Trump. So please do vote. Now, what happens during elections? I think everyone has talked about the violence. So the violence happens pre-election. If you go to Nairobi slums, every community is divided along tribal lines. You go to Line Saba, you go to Katuikera, you go to 42, you go wherever you go, you go to Soweto and Kibera, it's divided. You go to Madare, number 10, you go to Roe, the other side of the river, it's also tribal lines. So people move from the village, come to the city and look for an uncle or an auntie or someone they know in that community, and they find their tribe in that community. So when it's about to vote, when you hear the reason why there's a lot of fear about Madoado hotspots, is because when people say, you don't belong here, they're saying that when the time comes for voting and our person loses, you're going to suffer. And that's the reason why people are very afraid in this coming election. There have been talks by both the ruling party, which is the now coalition between the President Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga, and then now the Deputy President who supposedly is in the opposition now. There's talk on both sides that there's going to be election rigging. What that does to the population, it primes people that irrespective of the outcome, if your candidate doesn't win, there's irregularities. Now, when that actually happens, there's going to be violence. So what can we do? The thing is, the people who are talking about rigging are the people who are most responsible for showing that their supporters don't fight. Because eventually, when the results are announced, it's the supporters who fight on behalf of the politicians. So we must find a way of making these people who are vying for these elective offices to agree that the supporters know, irrespective of the outcome. We have a court, which have overturned an election, the last election, and we have the rule of law that there will be no violence. But it makes me afraid because Kenya has never had, Kenya has had about 6 general elections, and the last free and fair election was 2002. Every other election, 92, 97, 2007, 2013, 2017, people died. The time the ruling party lost power, that was Moi. That's the only time there's no election violence and there's no displacement of people. That's the only time. So what can we do now? And this discussion is one of those ways to ensure that this election is like 2002, where there was no violence and people accepted the outcome of the results, or rather the vote.
Sorry, I was muted. Boniface, thank you. And you asked you've taken us into the territory of the next question I asked, which is, how are you preparing for this election cycle? And we're told that this will be the mother of all elections, and there are fears that it will be that it has, it will be a replay of the 2007 election. So what should your funding partners, the people here, know about the constraints that you're facing and what that means for the communities you serve? So I'll throw that question to you, Boniface, because you took us into that territory.
So there's a need for partners. So the good thing about partners that we work with is that they have connections with their embassies in their mother country. And there's a need to have a donor roundtable, both embassies and private foundations and philanthropic organizations, to say that what is that one message that we must make sure that the government adopts. Our government cares a lot about PR and how they're perceived outside this country. And so it's very important to find a way to tie them to a binding document, or where you can say that what is a deed, where they'll actually say it publicly, that there's gonna be free and fair elections. And the two main candidates, Raila Odinga and William Ruto, say whatever is announced, you're going to accept the results. And if there's a dispute, you're not going to go to the streets, you're going to go to court. So we ensure that the people who can call for violence are politicians. The people in this land are just foot soldiers. So there's a need for that. And number two, partners. The people who you fund know what's best in the community. So put them in a straight jacket that they must do this or this or that. Ask them, what's the best intervention between now and the elections? What can they do with the money that you've given them? Because the challenge you have, as a program officer or someone implementing the project, and what's best to do in the community. Problem is, donor funding comes with such strict lines and budget lines, you can't go outside that. So there's a need for another discussion. We need to workshop what works best for this now. And then the beauty could be that all partners agree that our partners on the ground can come together and work on the same theme across the country. So they need to be unison of messaging, because politicians have unison of winning the election, and there are two messages. There's the Azimio and there's UDA. They are very unified in winning election. We need to unify our message to ensuring that there's gonna be a peaceful election and a country after August 9th.
Thank you, Boniface. Khadija, from where you sit, how are you preparing for this election cycle? What should your funding partners know about the constraints you're facing, and what the implications of those constraints are for your beneficiaries?
Actually, for organization, the first thing we were trying to do is to make sure that most of our members have registered as voters, so that we can be part of the voice that decides who is going to sit. So we are also preparing to make sure that especially the sick people are also able to get to the voting stations. And also we do sensitize our youth not to be misused, because we believe they are a force of change and they can help the organization to move the communities forward if we are all together. Because of the anxiety in the people, we also try to put more effort in making people realize that it is them who can decide what is happening despite your status quo. And so we do believe in Tumaini, we have a lot of strength in this, because we man a lot of community center points and they listen to us. So we usually make sure that whenever a leader is coming to our area, we emphasize to them that what he has to tell the people is what he first has to listen to the people, and then what he has to tell the people is to make sure that they live together, because we don't support anybody who comes with tribal superiority or tribal mentionings. So in that way, we enable our people to be part of the voting, to be part of the voice, and also we mobilize the ones who can't go to the centers. We make sure that we have persons who can support them to go to these particular centers.
Okay, so that's what you're doing. But in terms of your constraints, what constraints are you facing because of the election? What are you unable to do because of the election?
Sometimes we don't get enough ARVs for our people and we feel abandoned because they cannot access the basic needs they need. And even
why is that?
Because some areas are not accessible. If you have a group from, for example, if I go to one center point, which is different from another center point because of the tribal differences, then it is not possible for me to get these people across that center point so as to reach the health facility because of the differences of tribes. So this one is a big problem, and our Council of Elders, which is consisted of all the tribes in Isiolo, is really standing up to say, we have to let people access treatment and access rations because some of them under WFP rations because of the drought and the situation in Isiolo now. But sometimes it is very difficult to get these foods to the people or to get even the water to the people. So we are really in a dilemma at this point, and we are hoping that this anxiety is not going to dig deeper into our community so as to get us back to where we were in abandonment and discrimination.
Okay, Alfred, I'll come to you. You work with young people, you emphasize peace messaging. Boniface has talked about, peace pacts. And there's a comment in the chat from Mike, who says, people have pledged to work for peace before, but it hasn't worked. And those of us who are cynical know that's because during the day, people say one thing, and at night they mobilize, for another. So Alfred, what are you doing to prepare for this election cycle?
Thank you so much. So for us, we started like 6 months ago because election process for politicians, it started like 2 years ago. And for us realizing that, we thought, yeah, it hasn't stopped and it's actually going on and on. So we have actually been engaging young people in conversations, and that is both offline and online. And we've been utilizing the power of media to engage young people in voter education, and of course, working hand in hand with IBC, and also trying to educate young people also through art and sports activities to engage young people and also to mobilize them to actually come in and register as voters. That one we've not ended there. We are actually right now training peace monitors and also peace observers in different communities, and also setting up community working groups in specific communities that we think have been prone to post-election violence. Something else we've been working on, we've been working with local politicians, specifically the MCAs and MPs, and we've been having a call for action for them to actually sign up to be peace builders. But one of the key challenges have been to plug into the national manifestos of different political parties. As much as we've been working with local politicians, our voices haven't been all the way into the national political manifestos. And I think according to what Boniface Mwangi has just shared, it will be so important for us to, within all these political parties manifesto, for us to have one key pillar on peace building or peace pact as one of their political manifestos. We've also been working with government and specifically police, and within that we are saying police in Rafiki. Our young people have been working closely with the police to build up synergy so that when it comes to during the elections, it shouldn't be police against the youth or the youth against the police. So for us, that one, those are some of the things we've been doing. Something else that we think needs to work out for us is we've been having designed programs with different international organizations. And we think that it's important for us to co-design programs with them so that the programs can be specifically targeting the specific communities, because different communities have different needs and different approaches to work in different community setups differently. Thank you so much.
Okay, so Alfred, you're doing all this work, but we've also been talking about the restrictions on funding, the restrictions on programs, how difficult sometimes it is to adapt and respond to emerging needs. So what do you think your funding partners ought to know about your emerging needs? what would you like them to do in terms of how they respond?
Thank you so much. I think I have 3 key pointers to what the partners need to look into. My number 1 point will be capacity building local actors, and that is youth-led organization into different methodologies on how they can actually enhance their peace building work and also their work as we are moving towards the election. The second thing will be coalition building, and they should work with us to build coalitions with different youth-led organizations, different community organizations, different women organizations, so that we can have a concerted effort. And as Bonnie has said earlier on, it will actually, we'll be speaking from one script as youth-led and also women and also all the other actors. The other thing is that as we are approaching to the elections, our funders need to understand that we need to have flexible funding or flexible resources that will actually make us design and co-design activities according to how the things are going and how the ground is going. And that one will actually make it easier for us to always come up with different strategies that can work on different specific communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred. Nerima, I'll move us along because Alfred has started answering the final question I have for you as panelists, which is, what does responsive grant making in an election year look like from your perspective? If you were a funder, what 3 things would you do to support your grantees during this election cycle?
I think that my co-panelists have already mentioned, like Bonnie talked about the people in the community understanding where their issues are. So especially when we talk about the majority population being young people, funders do not trust young people. What ends up happening is you find older, larger institutions that have a pillar that deals with youth, but not the actual youth organizations receiving that funding directly, as what Alfred is talking about. But also the fact that we have funders who support very similar initiatives. We need to push for more collaboration for better impact. And a classic example, Alfred has talked about a manifesto and building it up to the political parties or high level at executive. There are about 6 organizations right now working on a youth manifesto, and some of them from the same funder. So why? Like, these people should come together, and it's through that power of all these initiatives coming together, then we will have politicians now being forced to listen, because that's a large population. We're talking about 13 million young people who are within the age bracket to be able to vote and to participate in this process. Another thing that I see is funders need to put their money where their mouth is, or just believe and do what they say that they do. Because when you talk about, okay, we want to invest in marginalized communities, young people, women, that's going to topple dynamics in countries that have social, cultural traditions and changing a lot of things. And because you're changing those things, the security of these entities, organizations, or individuals that push for these things is not going to come, they don't even think about the security of the people doing these things. Because even when we're talking about an election year, when you talk about awakening young people to vote and to participate, the aspirants, incumbents, they don't want people to participate. They rather deal with people who voted them in, rather than have to deal with new voters coming in and to try to persuade them to vote for them. So they rather deal with that. So when you come in and you're changing dynamics, which is what we're all here trying to do, and all of us are donor funded, then it becomes a challenge for many of us who end up either getting threatened, if not by politicians, by people within the community who don't want us to change those dynamics. But security is never really brought up when it comes to funding and securing and putting the right institutions in place. Those are just some of the.
Yeah, thank you, Nerima. Since you're the one speaking, I'll put this question that Leah Masamo asks, which is, for organizations working in policy spaces, political transitions are big, especially when relationships have been established with those leaving office. How do we prepare for this transition and ensure continuity and progress in the county and national levels?
It's an awesome question. So for Kenya, I can speak about the public service, the fact that the average age is 55 years old. And so because of that, not only are you dealing with political leaders leaving these spaces, there are a lot of people who will be resigning and who will have to resign since the retirement age is nearing by. But young people don't view public service as an area of opportunity. So I know that there are organizations that are currently being supported to infiltrate or to sort of view public service as an area of opportunity, because it's going to be young people who continue this process. As long as young people don't see these areas of working for government as opportunity, not just as politicians, but as public servants, continuity will be difficult. And so building that system. But again, there's a challenge there because people within the public service feel threatened. The fact that young people are now seeing this as an opportunity and they feel like they're being kicked out. And the more that we moved toward digitizing everything, you know, for Kenya, we have the e-citizen platform. Right now, the government is trying to use platforms online to have access to land and title deeds. We have to remember when COVID started, the first department to shut down was the youth ministry. The fact that most people didn't know how to coordinate and continue using technology because they were not going to the office is a huge red flag. Yet we have so many young people who know how to use these systems, these platforms, and with more technology, better accountability and easier transition and continuity. And that's how we're going to have to start thinking about these solutions.
Okay, thank you, Nerima. Khadija, I'll come to you. And it's a question that I'm asking everyone else, which is, what does responsive grant making look like from your perspective? If you were a funder, what 3 things would you be doing to support your grantees during this election period?
You know, with funders, I think organizations, we need to build relationships and trust. And why do we do that? Because the local partner, actually the local actor, is the shoe wearer. And at this time, it's about life and peace, security. So actually, it is not a time for anybody to lie. It's a time for anybody to trust and to enable us to make the right decisions. For example, if you tell me about timelines, and when there is clashes, I have to move from one place to another. Please, how do I even manage these timelines? So timelines at sometimes will also depend on what is happening on the ground at that particular time. The other thing is the impact measures. To be very sincere, I'm taking care of people who are living with AIDS, orphan children, whatever. But then there is clashes and these people are insecure. I really have to change my strategies and start saving lives. Not now from HIV/AIDS, but from this madness that comes with clashes. Another thing is that we also need flexibility so that when things come on board, when things start changing and we are acting and responding to crisis, please, we would also wish that our partners can also listen to what we are saying. Because at that particular time, every day turns out to be another page. And this page does not fit so well in our estimated budget or planned activities. This day is stated on how are we going to survive the day, to be on another day. So it's about people and life, and also understanding and actually building relationship, and also for them to be ready to be our mouthpiece when we are really cornered we are really cornered and we can't reach out. To be frank, it is not very easy for us at this time to actually have faith in the government organs, because these are the systems sometimes that steer us around. In as much as we can speak up to our immediate, immediate politicians, sometimes we cannot reach the national organ because there are so many setbacks. And I also feel sometimes the government is afraid of the people because this is the time that the people are raising their voices. So the partners should actually build us up to have a bigger voice than we have so that we can be able to put things in shape And as organization, I do believe we are contributing so much in shaping this country and seeing the peace for our people.
Okay, thank you, Khadija. Boniface, there's a question here from a friend of ours in Malawi, participant, someone listening, Helen, a political activist who asks if there's been a mapping of the potential political violence hotspots, which I believe is done through the National Cohesion and Integration Commission. But the specific question also has to do with cross-party youth peace forums created. And I sent this question your way because you have a political party. So do we have a cross-party youth peace forum? Because Helen's observation is that youth and women groups are key, but having cross-party structures and opportunities for youth in different parties to interact and become friends also provides an opportunity to build meaningful relationships that can be used to proactively dispel potential violence.
It's an excellent question. So the challenge you have as our country, we don't have those people that you're talking about. Most political parties don't exist until an election. And when the election comes, they used to get into power, then they disbanded until the next election. So the party leadership that was there 5 years ago, let's say in one of these big political parties, not the same in this year election. The other thing, we don't register in political parties as members and pay a fee in this country. People just join parties. So there's no loyalty. The people who are loyal to the party are people who are running for public office. So as a political party, which I'm a member of, Ukoli Party, we do actually have we have a youth league, yes, but it's a very young youth league, but you don't have partners in the other political parties to work with. But you have to realize that no matter how much talk we have about peace on low level, if the top leadership doesn't care about peace, it will never happen. So there's a need for the responsibility of this peace messaging and the tone of ensuring that there's no violence should be set at the very top. Now, the danger we have as a nation is that there's never been consequence for electoral violence. When guys organize militia, when guys kill, when guys rape, when guys commit murder in the name of a politician, that person is never held accountable. So there's no deterrent. And that's what we need. We need a deterrent moving forward. We need to ensure that someone said, oh, they might sign the peace pact and then break it. It's very important to have a document they sign and commit to. So when they break it, we hold them accountable. Now, what is the way out? The way out is every single person in this country should be a peace watcher or a peacekeeper. And that means wherever you are, with your small phone, you can record conversations or take pictures of guys inciting. So we become the watcher. We don't leave this work to the government or to the politicians. Just ensure in our respective communities, we are watching out who are the inciters, who are mobilizing, where is the militia, who's doing what. Because if you start blowing the whistle early enough, they'll not do it. Disrupt the organizing of the violence, it won't happen. Now, the second level of violence that we must talk about is police brutality and police violence. In every election, police kill more people than any other politician. Because when there's a skirmishes or when there's a demonstration or there's a riot, the police come with live ammunition to disperse peaceful protest. So we need to engage the Inspector General of Police and the Interior Minister, Matiangi, or whoever will be in office by that time, to ensure that there's a commitment by the police that if there's a protest or there's riots, there'll only be rubber bullets and tear gas and water cannons. This thing of police leaving the police station with live bullets must stop, because every time there's a protest, someone must die because a police officer is going to come there and fire their live gun on a crowd of people, and people die. So as we talk about politicians, we must talk also about the behavior of police toward demonstrators. And there's a question asked about what should donors care about? They need to care about—
the question, the closing question, and you had started answering it at the beginning. And so far, this is what people have talked about, including yourself: a peace pact, flexibility around funding, around impact measurements, around evaluation, securing and facilitating access, using influence with high offices. And the question is, from your perspective, what does responsive grant making in an election year looks like? What else would you add to this list if you were a funder trying to support your grantees during this election period?
The safety and the well-being of the grantees, their physical safety, their mental safety, and their financial safety. They work under very stressful conditions. They never go for a break. They have to deliver. They get harassed. They get insulted. They get called all manner of names. There's a toll on them. There's even trauma. So, as the person who is implementing the program, after the election, how do you ensure that their well-being is taken care of? Is it a holiday break? Is it to pay for a therapist? One of the most expensive things in this country is therapy. I never knew that. I'm going for therapy and therapy is expensive. You're gonna sit down with someone for 1 hour, then you want 5,000 shillings. Maybe you have to go 3 or 4 times a week because how messed up you are. It's a lot of money. So is there a way that when you give a grant to a grantee and say that we know that through this election is gonna be a lot of stress, a lot of mental breakdown, that after the election, even during this election, there's a fund that staff can access to ensure that the mental well-being is good. Because if you have a defender whose mental well-being is taken care of, they're gonna be a healer and a lover, and they're not gonna spread hate. Because there's gonna be a lot of anarchy and chaos. And the guys who are involved in this work will be affected. What donors don't get is that in the last 10 years, there's been a lot of hate on civil society organizations and public benefits organizations. And so every time you do your work, you get a lot of hate and a lot of attacks. And they may not be physical, but those words stick and they're permanent. You Google my name or Nerima's name, and you'll see the insults that come alongside that name. So there's a need for partners to be involved with the well-being of their grantees. Let not this be a relationship where you give me money and spend, then you move on after submit my financials and my narrative report. How am I doing? How are we doing? And how can we heal together and work together? Don't just call me for asking for reports. Ask me and find out how I'm doing.
Okay, I felt like that was a mic drop moment. So let's just appreciate that. Thank you, Boniface. So look, we're coming to the close of this conversation. And before I hand you back to Siegel, I want to check the pulse in the virtual room. And so Virgile, if you've got the slides, if you could get those ready for us, because we should have 2 questions for the donor organizations and the grant making for the grant receiving, the grantees. If you could put those slides up, please, Virgile or Mudhoni, I'd be grateful. But in the meantime, there's a question here that came in. All right, the poll is up. And so we'll give you a minute to respond. So grantee organizations, what has changed for you as a result of this conversation? Will you seek out new funding opportunities with new funders? Is it possible that nothing has changed for you? You could engage your current funders about the elections and request flexibility, or you could consider adapting your programming to prepare and respond to the elections. That's for grantee organizations. For grant-making organizations, what has changed for you as a result of this conversation? You will increase your funding to Kenya because of the election. You will reduce your funding to Kenya because of the election. Your funding priorities will remain the same, or you will withhold funding because of the elections. And so if you could respond to that, to those questions for us, we would be very grateful. There's a question that came in from one of the participants, and we've answered most of the questions that were asked, but there's a question about case studies of CSO's resilience during tumultuous election periods. And my sense, Alfred, is that you are the person who is best able to respond to that. Give us an example of your organization's resilience during past election periods.
Well, thank you so much, Udwak, again. So as I don't share that I work within the slums. So when everything was breaking up, also our youth space was broken down, because again, the community, as Boniface had shared, the community have been made to believe that CSO is also playing a different role. So, and because we've been doing peace work, and for those politicians who never wanted peace work, sent young people to break into our youth space. But through that, we emerged strong, because we've now rebuilt back the youth space. And even some of the young people who are part of the post-election, who are part of the breaking down, are now part of the peace champions whom we are working with. So I'd like to say that it has been a journey, and our journey hasn't been easy in terms of getting the backlash from different community members, getting backlash sometimes on the online space because of what we believe in and what we stand for. But again, we've seen other people coming up, those who are opposed to our work, coming up and saying that indeed they are ready to work with us. We are a membership of an organization, and because of that, some young people who are part and parcel of the violence are now part and parcel of the peace monitoring team that we are having and working with. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's see, Virgil, Muthoni, do we have responses to the, okay. So 20% of you, granting organizations, what's changed for you? 20% of you are saying that you will seek out new funding opportunities. 20% say nothing has changed. And 70% of you say that you will engage your current funders about the elections and request flexibility. And 40% of you are saying that you will adapt your programming to prepare and respond to the elections. Not bad at all. And so for donor organizations, what's changed for you as a result of this conversation? 60% of you say you will increase your funding to Kenya because of the election. None of you say you'll reduce funding to Kenya because of the election. 40% of you say that your funding priorities will remain the same. And none of you say you will withhold funding because of the elections. These are fantastic results. And so panelists, I will thank you for doing a very good job in helping shift minds around how people engage with the elections, whether grant-making organizations or grantees. I'd like to thank you all for your time and your extraordinary insights and your generosity in sharing your experiences with us. So Boniface Mwangi, Khadija, Rama, Narima, Wako, Ojiwa, Alfred Sigo, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure moderating this conversation with you. There's a few more questions coming in, but the beauty of this conversation is now that we've started it, we can continue it. And the connections are made possible through SIGO, which will carry on connecting and convening people with interest in these types of concerns. My name is Udo Akamimo. It's been a pleasure moderating this conversation. I'll hand you back to the SIGO Family Foundation. And we have Grace Waithera to thank for her sign language translation. Thank you so very much. Muthoni.
Thank you very much, Udwak. Thank you very much to the panel for that very invigorating conversation. At this point, I'd like to call in our Executive Director, Andy Brandt, to share a message with us.
Thanks, Muthoni. I want to say thanks to our audience. We don't take your time for granted. There's so many asks on your time and your Zoom bandwidth, so we appreciate you very much for joining. Thanks to our panelists. Uduak, you described yourself as a cynic, and certainly the body of evidence from previous election years lends one to be skeptical that this year will be different. But I think the mere existence of this forum, amongst others, tells me that you, Uduak, our panelists, and myriad Kenyan visionaries are quite hopeful that they can change the course of history this year and make it unlike any other previous election year. To our Kenyan partners, I want to restate what we said a few times, that we have your back. SFF, SIGO Family Foundation, is committed to the Kenyan impact orgs that we support and the communities that they themselves support, especially around an election season when this needs ever so much more needed. To the other doers on this call, I would really encourage you to be open and honest with funders about your challenges. This may help them in how they define their grant making processes this year. And finally, a message for the funders. I want to make a really brief case to rush towards Kenya in 2022 and not away from it. If we think of impact as a simple equation, how much good you do multiplied by how long you do it, it can be pretty straightforward, even measurable, but I'd like to propose a third variable in that equation, that's timeliness. The impact that you support during a crisis is much more meaningful than during the calm. To put it differently, that young person, that young man who finds meaningful work because of a training program here in 2022 in Kenya is so much more important than that same opportunity availed of him next year or beyond. As a philanthropic funder, crises are opportunities, and we're built for these moments. At our best, we are fleet of foot with less layers of bureaucracy than other sources of funding. And at our best, we're driven by impacts, not politics, not ego or other. The risk to funders in a situation like this is in not rushing towards our partners in their communities in their times of greatest need. Now, that's the rhetoric. In terms of tactics, I want to offer just 3 simple suggestions. Keep it simple, double down on your trusted partners, the ones you already know, the ones you have extensive diligence on. As during the pandemic at its height, they can all use more funding, which leads us to number 2, offer unrestricted funding so that your partners can meet the moment, whatever it brings. And finally, if you have the courage or if you have the appetite to seek out new partnerships in Kenya this year, stand on the shoulders of funders like Siegel Family Foundation who have intel on the ground, have boots on the ground, have our own remarkable visionary team like Muthoni and Virgil on the ground, and no plans of leaving. And you know, in this sector, intel is a rare and an important commodity. I recall I was in Nairobi in December of 2007 during a particularly egregious moment of post-election violence, and it was terrifying. And I huddled in my hotel room, and I was really scared, and I was totally ignorant. And mind you, I was never in danger, but that lack of intel was debilitating. We have peers, friends, friendly funders, and our grantees to lean on. So please take advantage of those sources of intelligence. Yeah, let me conclude by saying we hope to see you around Kenya this year. Thank you so much. Asanteni sana, tuko pamoja. Tunashukuru.
Thank you so much, Andy. After those words, it's really hard to say anything else. I only want to pass a hearty and deep gratitude to all the panelists, to Boniface Mwangi, to Nerima Wako, to Hadija Rama, to Alfred Sigo, and to Udwa Kamimo for such a job well done, and especially with the challenges we've had today. Thank you very much. Folks, that's it for today. Thank you for sharing your time with us. Thank you for journeying with us as we try to understand how to do grant making better during an election season, and we'll see you next time. Good day, good afternoon, good evening.